All right, so are you ready to dive into ancient Rome?
Definitely. I think it's fascinating that we're going back to this world of togas and gladiators.
But we're going beyond just the spectacle.
Right, exactly. It's not just about the Colosseum and all that. We're talking about a guy whose words still resonate like centuries later.
Cicero.
Yeah, Marcus Tullius Cicero, lawyer, philosopher, politician. This guy navigated it all. And the drama.
Oh, tell me about it. Roman politics back then makes House of Cards look tame.
Right, and that's what makes him so fascinating to study. So we're using this biography by Pierre Grimal. It's called Cicero.
And it's not just like a dry recounting of dates and names.
No, not at all. Grimal really gets into the nitty-gritty of ancient Rome. Like, you really understand the world Cicero was operating in, what made him tick.
Right, like what were his influences? What made him such a captivating speaker, a master persuader?
Exactly. And how did he go from small-town kid to this powerhouse orator? That's a story in itself.
It's a true underdog story.
Nice.
And that's what we're here to uncover in this deep dive.
Right.
What made Cicero Cicero?
Totally. And trust me, there's more to him than just those famous speeches.
Oh, I bet. So let's rewind all the way back to his childhood, Cicero. He wasn't born in Rome, right?
Nope. Small town called Arpinum.
Arpinum?
Uh.
Not exactly where you'd expect a Roman legend to come from.
And that's what makes his rise so interesting. He wasn't handed anything. He had to work for it. Sharpen his skills, his mind.
A true self-made man. Okay, so how does a kid from Arpinum break into the Roman political scene? Was everyone as obsessed with education as they were with gladiatorial combat?
Well, about that, Grimal tells this funny story about Cicero's grandfather. Seems the old man was no fan of Greek literature.
Wait, really? But that was like all the rage back then, right? Kind of like refusing to listen to the hottest new music just because it's in a different language?
It might sound crazy now, but back then, Rome was still figuring out this whole Greek culture thing. Some people, like Cicero's grandpa, saw it as a threat to Roman traditions.
So even as a kid, Cicero's exposed to these clashing worldviews, tradition versus innovation, Roman versus Greek.
Exactly, and that tension is key to understanding Cicero's entire journey. It's like these early exposures to different viewpoints, they lit a fire in him, this passion for knowledge, for seeing different sides of things.
Makes you wonder how different history might have been if Grandpa Cicero was more open-minded, huh? But I digress. So how does this small-town kid with a grumpy grandfather become Rome's legal eagle? Spill the beans.
Well, it starts with education.
Obviously. But not like the stuffy classrooms we think of now, right?
More like apprenticeships with the best and brightest minds in Rome. Think mentors. Think learning by doing. It was all about sharpening those intellectual skills.
Like learning a trade, but for your mind.
I love it. Okay, so who are we talking about here? Who are these mentors?
Oh, only some of the biggest names in Roman intellectual circles. We're talking Quintus Mucius Scaevola. He was nicknamed the Augur. The Augur. Okay, for those of us who didn't major in Roman history, what's an augur?
Oh man, picture this. A legal expert so respected that people treated his house like an oracle. People flocked to Scaevola for advice. Like his word was law.
Wow, so Cicero's literally learning at the feet of a legend.
Basically. And get this, he also studied rhetoric under Plotius Gallus, another huge name, A.N.D. He even dabbled in poetry under the tutelage of Archias.
Hold on, Cicero wrote poetry too. This guy was like a Renaissance man. I knew about the speeches and the politics, but poetry?
Oh, yeah. He contained multitudes. Grimal actually quotes Cicero from later in life. In this work, Pro Archaea, Cicero passionately defends poetry. He calls it an essential form of beauty crucial for developing the human spirit.
That's amazing. He saw all these different areas of learning as connected, like poetry, law, rhetoric. It all contributed to a well-rounded mind.
Exactly. He truly believed in this holistic approach to education, that knowledge in one area could inform and enrich your understanding of everything else.
It really makes you think about how we approach education today. We often compartmentalize knowledge, right? Specializing is important, but maybe we've lost sight of the value of a broad intellectual foundation.
You might be onto something there. But getting back to Cicero, while he's busy soaking up knowledge in Rome, the city itself is a hotbed of political unrest, even violence.
Oh, right. This is the late 80s BC, a time of huge uncertainty and change. And Cicero's in his late teens, early 20s during all of this.
Yeah, talk about a trial by fire. These experiences definitely shaped his worldview.
I bet. Imagine witnessing the brutality of civil war firsthand, seeing how fragile peace and order really are. It must have had a huge impact on his beliefs about leadership, about the importance of civic duty.
No doubt. And speaking of which, Grimal mentions this fascinating anecdote from this period. During a military campaign under Sulla, the Roman general, Something really strange happened while they were besieging the city of Nola.
A military campaign. Okay, you've got my attention. I love these glimpses into history. What went down at Nola?
Okay, so picture this. Sulla is making a religious sacrifice, hoping for some good omens from the gods, you know how it is. And right then and there, a snake emerges from beneath the altar.
Whoa, a snake. Talk about bad timing.
Oh.
Or was it a good omen? You're going to have to give us the historical context here.
Right, so an augur, you know those guys who interpret signs and omens?
Yeah.
He declares it a sign that Nola will soon fall. And what do you know, the city is captured shortly after?
So superstition wins the day. I've got a feeling Cicero, with all his logic and learning, probably had a slightly more nuanced take on this.
You're right to be skeptical. Grimmel points out that years later, Cicero actually revisited this whole snake incident in his philosophical work on divination. He questions whether Sulla's victory was really because of the snake, or, maybe the general's military genius had something to do with it too.
Classic Cicero, always pushing back against easy answers. He wanted people to think critically, to look beyond the surface level of things.
100%. But here's the thing. Even this seemingly insignificant story tells us something important about how Cicero saw the world.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What does it tell us?
It reveals this tendency he had to see the mythic dimension in everyday life, to connect even ordinary events to a larger story.
So he's not just recording events, he's trying to find meaning in them. Connect them to literature, to history, to philosophy. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It's like he's this master storyteller, finding those hidden connections between things. No wonder he was so good at captivating an audience.
Absolutely. And that drive to connect the dots to find meaning, it's going to shape his whole approach to writing, to politics, to life, really. But speaking of connecting dots, let's talk about Cicero's philosophical journey. After his military service, he really dives headfirst back into studying, exploring all these different schools of thought that were popular in Rome. Stoicism, Epicureanism, skepticism.
And he wasn't afraid to shop around, right? Like he was constantly seeking out new teachers, new mentors, almost like he was collecting different perspectives.
Totally. He wasn't just passively absorbing information, he was actively seeking out the best and brightest minds, drawn to the thinkers as much as the doctrines. Grimmel talks about how Cicero was captivated by this one guy, Phaedrus the Epicurean, not just by his ideas, but also by how elegantly he expressed them.
Okay, that tracks.
Yeah.
Given Cicero's love of language and rhetoric, it wasn't just what you said, it was how you said it.
100%. And then you've got Philo of Larissa, an academic who followed the teachings of Carneades the skeptic. And you might be thinking, wait a minute, how can you be a skeptic? A and D believe in persuasion.
Yeah, it seems kind of counterintuitive. Like if there's no absolute truth, why bother arguing about anything?
Right. But Philo, he believed that even without absolute certainty, there were still probabilities. Things that were more likely to be true than others. And those probabilities could guide action. He thought philosophers had a duty to engage in public life. And what better tool for influence than rhetoric?
So it's about using reason and logic, even without perfect knowledge, to navigate a complicated world, which honestly, that feels super relevant to how we make decisions today, doesn't it?
Totally. And this really resonated with Cicero. He was already drawn to the idea of using philosophy to make a real difference, not just some abstract intellectual exercise.
Makes sense, given his ambition, his growing involvement in Roman politics. But did he ever actually commit to one philosophical school over another?
That's the thing about Cicero. He never really picked just one team. Grimmel calls his approach eclecticism. But it wasn't just randomly picking and choosing ideas he liked.
More like he was synthesizing.
Right?
Taking the best of what each school had to offer and creating his own unique philosophy.
You got it. He took what resonated with him and built his own framework for thinking and acting.
Way ahead of his time. Today we call that being interdisciplinary, right? It's that intellectual independence that allowed him to engage with all these different ideas, adapt his thinking. It's what made him such a skilled orator, A&D politician.
It's like he was playing 3D chess while everyone else was stuck on checkers. But for all his intellectual achievements, it's important to remember, as Grimmel does, that Cicero was also a man of deep emotions. He had ambitions, anxieties, just like the rest of us.
Right? He wasn't just some philosophical robot. He was a real person navigating a messy world.
Exactly. And one of the things that makes Grimmel's biography so great is how he brings those personal aspects to life. Particularly Cicero's relationships with other big figures like Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and of course his best friend Atticus.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about those relationships, because they weren't always smooth sailing, were they? Let's start with Caesar. That's a complicated one. On the one hand, they're allies, both rising stars in Roman politics. But then there's this tension, this rivalry almost.
It's that classic power dynamic. You see it throughout history. Caesar, this military genius, ambitious, charismatic, a total force of nature.
Yeah.
Cicero, the eloquent orator, defender of tradition. He saw both the potential and the danger in Caesar's rise.
A bit of admiration mixed with healthy dose of, this guy could conquer the world, but can I trust him not to conquer mine?
You nailed it. And here's a fascinating tidbit. Grimmel mentions that Caesar was actually a bit of a poetry nerd, had a soft spot for grammar, too.
Really? Not exactly the image that usually comes to mind when you think Julius Caesar.
Right, you think military campaigns, conquests, not literary salons, but apparently Caesar was a man of letters as well as a man of action. And this shared intellectual passion, it really formed a bond between him and Cicero.
So even amidst all the political drama, they could still geek out over a good poem or grammatical debate. But how did their relationship evolve as Caesar's power grew? Because we all know how the story ends.
Right, well, Cicero, he's walking a tightrope. He recognizes Caesar's talent, even supports some of his policies early on. But there's always a but, isn't there?
Especially in Roman politics.
Cicero starts to get wary. He sees Caesar's ambition growing, and he sees it as a threat to the stability of the Republic, to those traditional values he holds so dear.
So he's torn between supporting a powerful ally and staying true to his principles. Classic dilemma.
The struggle is real, and it's something we still wrestle with today, right? Balancing personal gain with the greater good, trying to navigate those gray areas where power and integrity collide, which brings us to another major player, Pompey.
Pompey the Great. Famous for his military victories, his popularity with the people. You'd think Cicero would have been firmly on Team Pompey.
You'd think so. And at first he kind of was. He saw Pompey as this bulwark against populism and radical change. But over time, he became disillusioned.
What happened? Why the change of heart?
Well, for one thing, Pompey was a master of self-promotion. He cultivated this image as a hero of the Republic. And while Cicero understood the importance of public image, remember rhetoric, he also saw through the carefully crafted persona.
It's that age-old tension, substance versus style. Did Cicero think Pompey was all style, no substance?
It's a little more nuanced than that. There was a philosophical disagreement at play, too.
Okay, I'm all ears. Spill the philosophical tea.
So Cicero believed in the power of eloquence, yes, but he saw it as a means to an end. For him, rhetoric was a tool to advocate for justice. For the common good, Pompey, on the other hand, well, it seemed like he saw rhetoric as just another tool for personal gain, for manipulating public opinion to get what he wanted.
So for Cicero, rhetoric had to be grounded in something bigger than just ambition. It makes you wonder about political speeches today. Are they really meant to serve the people, or just to serve the speaker's agenda?
It's the question, isn't it? A debate for the ages. But while Cicero's navigating this chaotic political landscape, he finds solace, intellectual companionship in his friendship with Atticus.
Right, Atticus, the ultimate best friend, loyal, insightful, always up for a good conversation.
Yeah.
Were they two peas in a pod, or did they challenge each other?
They were definitely challenging each other in the best way possible. Grimmel portrays Atticus as this calming presence in Cicero's life, someone he could confide and bounce ideas off of, get advice from.
That's beautiful. And it sounds like Atticus wasn't afraid to push back on Cicero's thinking, even when they disagreed.
Oh, absolutely. Atticus was a devoted Epicurean, believed in seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, especially the pain of political turmoil.
Which seems a little at odds with Cicero's very active involvement in politics. You'd think Atticus would be telling him to relax in his garden, enjoy some wine, forget about saving the Republic.
Right. And those differences led to some fascinating discussions. We actually have a bunch of letters between them, gives us this incredible glimpse into their dynamic.
I love it when historical gossip survives. So what do we learn from their letters?
We see Cicero wrestling with his ambition, questioning his choices, seeking Atticus's advice. In one letter, he even talks about his anxieties, worried that he's losing influence, that his enemies are gaining ground.
Even Cicero, the great orator, had moments of self-doubt. Makes you realize these historical figures, they were human too.
Totally humanizes him. He achieved amazing things, but he still grappled with insecurities just like us. But as fascinating as his inner world is, things are about to get way more intense in Roman politics. Remember, his career was full of incredible highs, A&D crushing lows, including exile, political persecution. And those experiences, they're going to have a profound impact on his philosophy, on how he understands that balance between power and justice.
Let's talk about those challenges, starting with his exile. That was a defining moment in Cicero's life, a time of immense personal anguish, but also a time of deep reflection.
It was a huge turning point. In 58 BC, he's forced into exile because of his role in suppressing the Catilinarian conspiracy a few years earlier.
For those of us who skipped that day in history class, remind us who was Catiline and what was this conspiracy all about?
Okay, so Catiline was this ambitious politician who basically wanted to overthrow the Roman Republic. Cicero was consul at the time, and he exposed the conspiracy, had the main conspirators executed without a trial.
Talk about a power move, but something tells me that it didn't make him a lot of friends.
You could say that again. He saved the Republic, but he made some powerful enemies in the process, and when those enemies gained power, well, they came after him with a vengeance.
Punished for doing what he thought was right. It's like the old saying goes, no good deed goes unpunished,
You just
especially in politics.
truth. And Cicero's exile wasn't just a slap on the wrist either. He was banished from Rome. His property was confiscated. His life was even threatened.
Talk about a fall from grace. That must have been devastating, both personally and professionally.
It was a dark time. But Grimaud points out that this period of adversity, it also led to some serious personal growth for Cicero.
How so? Did he just spend all his time reading Stoic philosophy and perfecting his gardening skills?
Well, there was definitely some of that. But seriously, forced to confront his own mortality, the fickle nature of fortune, he turns to philosophy for solace. He spends his exile writing, reflecting on his actions, reassessing his priorities.
It's amazing how often adversity forces us to take stock, to reevaluate what's really important.
It's like that saying, sometimes you have to lose yourself to find yourself. And Cicero, he found himself in exile. In fact, this period of intense reflection, it produced some of his most powerful philosophical works, like Tusculan Disputations and On Duties.
It makes sense. He was wrestling with some heavy stuff. Virtue resilience, finding happiness in the face of hardship, not exactly light dinner party conversation.
Definitely not. And Grimaud highlights this really interesting detail from Cicero's exile. He has this vivid dream while he's in Athens.
Okay, I'm always down for good dream interpretation. What was it about?
So in the dream, Cicero encounters a vision of Marius, this famous Roman general who had also been exiled years earlier, and Marius assures Cicero that his own exile will be short-lived, that he'll return to Rome in triumph.
A prophetic dream. I'm getting chills. But knowing Cicero, he probably had a slightly more nuanced interpretation than just, yay, I'm coming back.
You know it. He didn't just see it as some kind of prediction. He saw it as a reflection of his own anxieties, his desires. For him, the dream was a manifestation of his subconscious yearning for justice, his hope for redemption.
Wow, I love that. He's using the dream as a tool for self-reflection, for understanding his inner world. It's like dream journaling, but 2,000 years ago.
Right, and it's this introspective approach that makes Cicero's writing so captivating. He's not just some detached philosopher spouting theories. He's a man actively grappling with real-life challenges, trying to use his intellect to make sense of it all.
And that personal touch, that vulnerability, it makes his ideas resonate even more strongly, even centuries later.
Totally. And get this Cicero's dream. It actually comes true. In 57 BC, he's allowed to return to Rome, welcomed back by cheering crowds, a true hero's return.
The underdog triumphs again. But I'm guessing, even with a happy ending, his exile left a mark.
It definitely shaped him. The whole experience deepened his understanding of human nature, of fate, of the importance of resilience, but it also strengthened his resolve to defend the Republic from those who threatened it.
Which brings us to his later political struggles, most notably his opposition to Caesar's growing power.
Right. As Caesar's ambitions become impossible to ignore, Cicero is caught in an incredibly difficult position.
Because remember, he supported Caesar in the past, even defended him in court. But now he sees Caesar as a threat to everything he believes in.
It was a real conflict of loyalty. How do you balance personal relationships with your duty to the greater good? In the end, Cicero chooses to side with those who are trying to uphold the traditional republic, even though it means going up against the most powerful man in Rome.
That takes guts. But it's also incredibly dangerous.
A huge risk. And as Caesar marches on Rome, Cicero has to make a choice: flee or face the consequences. He chooses to flee, seeks refuge in his villas outside the city.
So back into a kind of self-imposed exile, this time to escape Caesar's wrath.
Exactly. And of course, during this time of uncertainty, Cicero continues to write. He produces some of his most profound works during this period, including On the Republic and On Laws.
Talk about making the most of a bad situation. And those works explored some pretty heavy themes, right? The nature of justice, the ideal society, the rule of law.
Right, and these weren't just abstract philosophical musings. They were a direct response to the political turmoil happening around him. They were a call for reason, for a return to civic virtue, at a time when it felt like everything was falling apart.
It's like he's clinging to hope, trying to articulate this vision for a better future, even as the world he knows is crumbling around him.
It's incredibly powerful, and while Caesar ultimately wins, establishes himself as dictator, Cicero's writings, they outlive him. They offer this enduring message about power, about civic duty, about the struggle for justice.
And they would go on to inspire countless others, thinkers, leaders, who also dared to dream of a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely. Now, after Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, Cicero sees an opportunity, a chance to maybe, just maybe, restore the Republic to its former glory.
So he jumps back into the political arena.
He doesn't hesitate. He throws himself back into the thick of it, delivers this series of fiery speeches, the Philippics, denouncing Mark Antony, Caesar's former lieutenant, who's now making his own play for power.
Those speeches were legendary. Cicero pulls out all the stops, uses all his rhetorical skills to rally the Senate against Antony. He's basically calling him power-hungry, saying he's disrespecting the Republic's traditions.
He does not hold back. And for a brief moment, it seems like Cicero's vision might actually win out, but Roman politics were never that simple.
Because, of course, a power vacuum like that, it always leads to more chaos, more intrigue, more people vying for control.
Exactly. New alliances form, old rivalries resurface. And unfortunately for Cicero, this latest power struggle proves to be his undoing.
So his last attempt to save the Republic, it ends in tragedy.
Tragically, yes. As Octavian Caesar's adopted son rises to prominence, he forms an alliance with Antony and another powerful general, Lepidus. They create what becomes known as the Second Triumvirate.
And this triumvirate, they weren't exactly known for their tolerance of dissent, were they? Especially not from someone like Cicero, who had publicly denounced them.
You're right, Cicero's name ends up on their hit list. He's tracked down and killed in December of 43 BC.
What a heartbreaking end for someone who dedicated his life to serving his city, to upholding those ideals he believed in so passionately.
It's a reminder that the fight for justice, it often comes at a price. But while Cicero's political career may have ended in defeat, his legacy endured.
Because his writings, his speeches, his unwavering courage, those lived on. They continued to inspire generations to come.
Exactly, and that's what makes Cicero's life so incredibly relevant even today. He reminds us that the struggle for justice, the fight for liberty, these are ongoing challenges. Challenges that require vigilance, courage, and a willingness to speak truth to power, no matter the cost.
And that even when we face setbacks, defeats the power of ideas, it can outlast even the mightiest empires.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Speaking of powerful ideas, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into Cicero, I want to highlight one more detail that Grimal mentions.
Okay, light on me.
It's about Cicero's villa in Tusculum, his refuge from all the chaos of Roman politics.
Ah, yes. Those villas. The ultimate status symbol for wealthy Romans. A place to relax, enjoy nature, and I'm guessing engage in lively philosophical debates.
You know it. And as Cicero's decorating his villa,
He makes a very deliberate choice, one that really reflects his values, his vision of leadership.
Okay, you've got me on the edge of my seat. What did he do?
He specifically chose not to include statues of war gods, like Mars.
Interesting. That's a pretty bold statement considering how prominent military themes were in Roman art and culture. It's like refusing to put up those live, laugh, love signs today, just to be different.
Right, and Grimal suggests that this choice, it reflects Cicero's deep belief in the importance of peace and diplomacy. He wanted to be remembered not as a conqueror, but as a peacemaker. Such a powerful message, especially given the time he was living in. It's like he's saying true strength. It doesn't come from military might. It comes from reason, from eloquence, from the relentless pursuit of justice.
Exactly, and it's a message that feels incredibly relevant today, don't you think? In a world that's often driven by conflict, we could all use a little more of Cicero's commitment to peace and diplomacy.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive, from Cicero's philosophical explorations to his complicated relationships with Caesar and Pompey, to his time in exile, and his ultimate demise. Where do we go from here?
From here, let's shift gears a bit and really dive into Cicero's philosophical legacy. We've been touching on his ideas throughout our conversation, but I think it's worth exploring them in a bit more detail.
I'm totally on board with that, because it's clear Cicero wasn't just some politician or speech giver. He was a deep thinker, someone who grappled with some of life's biggest questions. And he did it all while rocking a toga.
Right. And what's so fascinating is that he wasn't just repackaging Greek philosophy for a Roman audience. He was really engaging with those ideas, adapting them to his own time and place, truly making them his own.
He was an innovator, a synthesizer, not just a translator. Okay, so what were some of those core themes? He kept coming back to them again and again.
One big one, the concept of virtue, specifically those 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance.
Ah, yes, the classics. But I have a feeling Cicero wasn't just reciting ancient wisdom here. He probably had his own spin on things.
You know it. For Cicero, virtue wasn't just about personal morality, it was the foundation of a just and stable society. He thought leaders especially, they had this duty to embody those virtues, to set an example for everyone else.
So it's not enough to just talk the talk. You got to walk the walk, especially if you're in a position of power, which, let's be real, that's a message we could all use a reminder of.
Totally. And that link between personal virtue and being an effective leader, it comes up again and again in Cicero's work.
Makes you think about the qualities we look for in leaders today. Do we value virtue as much as Cicero did? It's a good question.
It really is. Now, another big idea that fascinated Cicero, the concept of the ideal society. He wrote a lot about the best form of government, explored different models, drew on his own experiences in the messy world of Roman politics.
And this is where his famous work on the Republic comes in, right? Didn't he make the case for a specific type of government there?
He did. In On the Republic, Cicero argues for something called a mixed constitution. It's this system that balances out the interests of different social classes, makes sure no one group gets too powerful.
Kind of like checks and balances.
Exactly. Cicero believed that a healthy republic, it needed this balance of power between the Senate, representing the aristocracy, the people's assemblies, representing the citizens, and the magistrates, who held the executive power.
All about preventing tyranny, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that power is distributed. No one person or group can just take over. You know, that whole idea of checks and balances, it feels so relevant today with all the debates about, I don't know, the balance of power in democracies.
100%. And it's amazing to see how this concept, this idea that Cicero articulated all those centuries ago, it still shapes how we think about government, about the importance of protecting against abuses of power.
It's like his ideas are woven into the fabric of Western political thought. You mentioned earlier that Cicero was also really influential when it came to developing natural law theory. What exactly is natural law? Maybe we can unpack that a bit.
Yeah, let's break that down. Natural law. It's this idea that there are these universal moral principles, and they exist regardless of any human laws or customs. These principles, according to Cicero, they're rooted in reason itself, accessible to everyone, if you just take the time to really observe and reflect.
So it's like there's this higher law, this moral code that goes beyond any laws that we humans come up with.
That's it. And Cicero believed human laws, they should be based on this higher law. They should reflect those universal ideas of justice and fairness. Otherwise, they're just rules without a moral compass.
It's like saying laws need to be more than just rules. They need to be rooted in something bigger, something inherently right.
Right. And it's fascinating to see how Cicero's ideas about natural law,
Yeah.
they went on to have this huge impact, influenced concepts like human rights, even the idea of a just war.
Seriously mind-blowing how these ideas from so long ago, they still resonate today.
Yeah.
Shows you how ahead of his time Cicero really was.
Absolutely. But Cicero's brilliance, it wasn't limited to just politics and law. His work also has these really insightful things to say about, I don't know, the nature of happiness, the importance of friendship, even the search for meaning in life.
Okay, let's talk about happiness for a second. Who doesn't want to be happy,
Right.
right? But I'm guessing Cicero's definition? It probably went a bit deeper than just,
Yeah.
you know, having a nice chariot and a villa in the country.
Oh, for sure. For Cicero, true happiness, it wasn't about fleeting pleasures or collecting a bunch of stuff. It was about living a virtuous life, cultivating your mind, contributing to your community. It was about aligning your actions with your values and finding fulfillment in something bigger than yourself.
So true happiness comes from living a life of purpose,
Yeah,
of trying to make a positive impact on the world. That's a pretty different message than what we often hear today.
totally. And it's a message that's more relevant now than ever. You know, we're always bombarded with these messages about getting happiness from external stuff. But Cicero's right there reminding us that real fulfillment, it comes from within, from connecting with something larger than ourselves.
It's a powerful message, especially in today's world. What about friendship? We talked earlier about his close bond with Atticus.
Yeah.
How did that shape his views on friendship in general?
It's obvious that his own experiences, they really influenced his thinking on this Cicero. He believed that real friendship, it was crucial for human beings to thrive. He saw it as this bond built on mutual trust, respect, unwavering support, the kind of connection that helps you get through tough times and become the best version of yourself.
So it's not just about having people to hang out with. It's about those deep connections that challenge you, support you, help you grow.
Exactly. And the best part is Cicero's writing about friendship. It offers this timeless wisdom, insights into those essential human bonds, and it's just as relevant today as it was centuries ago.
Makes you appreciate those folks in your own life.
Right.
The ones who make your journey richer, help you become a better version of yourself.
Absolutely. And as we start to wrap up this exploration of Cicero's legacy, there's just one more point I want to emphasize.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Cicero truly believed that philosophy, it wasn't just some intellectual exercise, something you debate in a fancy university. For him, philosophy, it was a way of life. He thought the whole point of studying philosophy, of engaging with big ideas, was to actually use those ideas to live a better life, to become a better person, to make a real difference in the world around you.
So it's about taking those big ideas out of the textbook
Mhm.
and actually putting them into practice, using them to guide your decisions, how you navigate relationships, how you act in the real world.
Exactly. And it's that focus on actually applying philosophy, on living your values, that makes Cicero's work so relevant and inspiring today. He's reminding us that philosophy isn't just about theories, it's about finding wisdom and guidance to live a more meaningful life.
That's a perfect note to end on.
Yes.
Well, there you have it, folks. Our deep dives into the life and times of Marcus Tullius Cicero. We hope you enjoyed this little journey with us, that you've gotten a new appreciation for the man behind the legend, and that you'll walk away with some of his wisdom to guide you on your own journey.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure exploring Cicero's world with you.
And thank you to all our listeners for coming along for the ride. We'll catch you on our next deep dive.